it's not that they don't have the drive or the chance. They don't have the drive or the motivation to escape. It's just that they are born into it, they live in it, they grow up in it, and they will die in it. And sometimes they just can't escape that.
I think going off of what Isha was saying before, you can look at the different racial stereotypes. So things like Asians are generally smarter. Indians always have to go into IT and computer science, doctor, lawyer, that kind of thing. That also I feel has a big role in that too.
Like cues, like social cues. I'm pretty sure, in my opinion, I think you can tell if someone has a prejudice. Of course, no one's going to blatantly tell you that I hate you because you're blah, blah, blah. I hate you because you're Latino, I hate you because you're Asian. But I think you can tell with certain cues that someone is in some way prejudiced or biased against you.
But I think the point is more of getting the underlying factors that we've become so used to, just kind of the little texts that where if a teacher were to choose an Asian student or a white student over a Latin student or a black student, I think it's something that's very subtle but still very present. I think that's what.
Maybe it's something that person doesn't even realize.
I think that's what basically.
That's what implicit bias is. Yeah. You don't realize that it's a thing you're doing.
Then the question is, how do we?
With students, the problem.
Yes.
Like I said before, how I've never exactly pinpointed it exactly where I had immediate bias against a black student or a Chinese student about that person's dumb versus that person's smart because I've met both sides and I've grown up in an environment that is predominantly pretty mixed for American suburbs, but everybody has implicit bias. It's part of the way the human mind works socially.
Well, I did volunteering with a club in Princeton, and I think everybody just assumed I was smarter than I was, because they were asking me about circuits and gears and stuff like that. I was like, I have absolutely no idea, and they were puzzled for a second, you could see, and I think it's just kind of a habit to immediately assume that someone of Asian or white or whatever race has a certain type of intelligence, but I think a lot of times people play into those stereotypes, so that's why people don't recognize it as often.
Tax cuts and all this, and I think it's almost a testament to just how the middle class feels, personally.
And also, you're talking about classism a lot, but the achievement gap is a lot there. Is the focus on it in terms of how the government goes about trying to fix it is very much racial based. So the big example is affirmative action, and I think that the middle class even. The racial minorities in the middle class still benefit from affirmative action, and as do racial minorities. And one of the biggest issues is racial minorities in the upper class who benefit from affirmative action over whites or at least racial majorities who exist in the middle and lower class who have the same exact resume, but since they're not a racial minority, they don't get the same consideration. I think that. What was my point? My point was that a lot of the time, at least in terms of how we address the achievement gap, a lot of the times, one of the biggest debates about the affirmative action now is to remove that aspect of racial profiling and revert to not revert because it hasn't happened before, turn to a class-based one where you have different rungs of the socioeconomic ladder get you different benefits. So if you have person X who has the same exact GPA, achievements, blah blah blah, as person Y, but person X's mean income is $75,000 less than person Y, then person X should get a bit more consideration because they achieved all those things and had this many fewer economic opportunities as the other person. And I think that as we progress, one of the biggest shifts in terms of fixing the achievement gap has been from a race-based one to a class-based one.
I think going off Matthew's point, I think a lot of times it's been assumed because the lower class tends to be minorities, that it's assumed that if we help the lower class, we are inherently helping the racial problem as well.
I think it's the other way around.
I don't think it's the other
Well,
way.
I think they think if
I
we're helping
think-
the racial problem, then we're helping the lower class because they know
Oh,
that majority of
I-
the lower class is race.
Well,
is
everything
racial
is
minorities.
underlying a poverty issue.
Yeah, so regardless, the minorities are often seen, often portrayed to be at the lower class, at the lower spectrum. So if you were to help, again, your point, I don't think
Well, I
it's
don't
it's vice versa.
No, it matters. 'Cause
No, it doesn't.
it
If
does.
you were to help like a Latino or make an act for like Latinos and Africans, just African Americans, saying that I guess like the whole affirmative action thing, you know, like we'll give you like if like the whole seats thing, I think that's how it works. I don't really know how affirmative action works really, but if they're making an act for those for a specific kind of minority, specific minorities that tend to be seen in the lower class, you are inherently helping the lower class, the majority of the lower class. So I think your point, although I understand where you're coming from, it can be seen vice versa.
No,
Yes.
because if they thought that if they thought that by helping races that would fix the achievement gap, that's what gave us affirmative action. But if they thought that by fixing the socioeconomic problem that would fix race, then we would have the class-based one. So I think it's very important about which one people think causes the other, because I don't think a lot of people now, at least, assume that if you're a racial minority, therefore you're lower class. But I do think they think that if you're lower class, you're probably a racial minority, because nowadays we talk about again the model minority. A lot of people know about the successes of Indians, and a lot of people know about the successes of Chinese Americans and Japanese Americans and just general Asian Americans. So I think now, as people have started to realize that, there's a huge overexpression of Chinese Americans and Indian Americans in
Overrepresentation.
overrepresentation. Thank you. In American universities, they've started. That's been the main impetus for the push for class-based affirmative action, so that they can fix the racial problem from a class-based stance rather than fix the class-based stance from a racial stance. So I think the distinguishment between the two is very important.
I
Can
don't.
I just interject for a second before you guys carry on with the conversation? There's a point that I wanted to make earlier. So, going off of what Ferris was originally saying about the middle class and the president putting taxes on the middle class and how the middle class feel. So, as someone who's also part of the middle class, I agree and disagree. Because I don't think that anything was taken away from my public education, being a person in the middle class, by people who are part of the lower class. Just in my own situation. But I do think that when it comes to the middle class going into college, there is like no funds, there's no scholarships, no grants, at least for my, in my experience, that's need-based and not merit-based. So I feel like